Welcome, everybody. I am so happy to be here today to talk about marketing and corporate fundraising and how the power of internal collaboration can make them really work together. As you know, I am Heather Nelson. I work as a in. Sorry about that. I am an expert in corporate partnerships with my organization, Bridge Raise. And we talk about corporate partnerships from the angle of collaboration internally and externally all the time. And it comes up regularly in our work how we can maximize marketing as part of our corporate partnerships. So I was super excited when one of my friends, Mallory Erickson, if you're not following her, you should, brought together a bunch of consultants to talk about this topic. In that conversation, we were coming up with ideas about how to collaborate together. That turned into a podcast. What the Fundraising is Mallory Erickson's podcast, and episode 105 is about Unsiloed, cameo by me and my guest on our live today. Jordana Merkin is going to join me, and we're going to talk about this. And I hope, if you have any questions or anything, throw them in the chat. If you're joining, please say hi, where you're from. Love to hear from you. And here, welcome, Jordana.
Hi.
Hi. I would love for you to introduce yourself and tell our listeners all about your work in corporate fundraising and marketing and what you are up to.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Heather. I'm Jordana Merkin. My nonprofit marketing consulting business is Voice for Good. After about a decade in-house at various nonprofits of various sizes and resources in a marketing and communications capacity, I now work as a consultant and I help mostly smaller nonprofits tell their big stories through clear messaging and strategic marketing.
I love that. Big stories and small organizations. It's so good. And you know what? It's interesting to hear you sort of describe the in being inside and then coming to the consulting side. What I also did, and I think that really does help us have a really good idea about the different departments. And sometimes it's different departments. Sometimes it's one person that has a bunch of different functions and are almost trying to balance that out so that when we're providing guidance, we're really both thinking about, okay, when we're working with clients, but also, harkening back to the days when we were trying to coordinate those things internally as well. Do you find that you're referencing both of those in your work regularly?
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely think back on, again, the different organizations that I worked with and different size departments and, different access to resources and definitely different conversations, especially around this topic of marketing and fundraising and corporate fundraising and, how they work together at best. So, yeah, especially around this conversation, but in general, I do find myself, thinking back on that experience a lot.
It's true. This conversation really brings it up. And I think that one of the interesting kind of, I don't know, milestones in an organization is when they have a person or more than one person, but
Mhm.
at least a person that has each of these functions, right? Because for a while in many organizations, it's either merged or at least one of them is with the executive director. And then, you get to a certain level of maturity and you have a person that is in marketing and a person that is in fundraising. And that is really for people who are listening right now, that is really more what we're talking about today. It could be a volunteer in some cases, so we're not saying it is always a paid employee, but we're talking about the situation where there is these two functions done by different people in the organization, and so that how those can work together, how they can really understand their mutual roles in corporate fundraising. So let's start with like the basics. We're going to set the level set here and just define, when you say marketing at a nonprofit organization, what kinds of things are you talking about? Like, give us a sense of what that means.
Sure. So in its broadest sense, I'm talking about getting the word out. So, that means different things for organizations at different times, right? A good marketing plan really supports organizational goals. So that can mean lots of different things, right? It can be mission awareness, it can be awareness of a specific initiative or program. It almost always ends in some part or large part fundraising, corporate fundraising. It can mean a lot of different things, but the marketing piece is really what supports all of that in spreading the word.
And so if some people are just like a bit newer to thinking about this, can you just give me a few like tactics or tangible things that are like in a marketing plan so that we can kind of like get our hands around, okay, yeah, it supports goals and I get that, but like, give me some like specifics.
Yeah. So again, it will vary, but in general, the things that are always in a marketing plan are, if we're talking about organizational goals, then we break that down into strategies to achieve those goals, and then the practical tactics to achieve those strategies. That also will include a content strategy. So, what are the ways that we're thinking about reaching people, and then the tactics around those strategies. So that can be through social media or through email, or the different channels and platforms available. Those are generally the two big ones, but I'm a big fan of print in the right time and place, so like that's also a thing that happens. So when you get down to like the tactical levels, you think about like which post on which day. um,
Mhm.
but again, it should all be done with a bigger picture thought process in mind. That's the strategy part, right? You don't want to just throw up a post because you haven't in a while, right? You want it to be cohesive with the rest of your strategy and the ways that you're thinking about the bigger picture goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the first places where we can start to see the overlap happen, right? Where the organizational goals, one of the organizational goals in many charities is, revenue related, i- to service a mission, of course, or to service their beneficiaries, but there's like this revenue piece in there and how maybe a fundraiser would execute against that and marketing it can be different, right? And so I think that's one of the things that when we boil it down to tactics, uh, where the overlap kind of can really show up. So with that in mind, like, because my focus is all about corporate, what are some of the ways that you could imagine corporate showing up in the strategy, and then maybe a goal or a tactic that would go with that?
hmm So yeah. So, okay, I want to back up a minute. So, when you were
Good.
talking about who we're speaking about here, right? It's
Yeah.
organizations that have two different people in these roles.
Right.
And that's also a moment where you can get some friction, right? Where it's, well, I
Mhm.
have this in mind and you have that in mind. And you may be speaking to, always in marketing and in fundraising, but, on my side of things, audience is super important to consider. So,
Mm.
it may seem like, well, you're speaking to a broad audience, let's say on social media, for example. Whereas, on the corporate fundraising side, you have like one person who you're targeting about a particular ask. What I would really encourage is to make sure that, to remember that even if there are two or more people in each of these roles, one person in each role or two or more people working together, that we're really all on the same team and that they are shared goals. And that the tactics again may look a little different, and we can talk about that, but that that internal collaboration is really what's going to reverberate out when you start to think about external communication. um, so in terms of corporate fundraising and corporate partnerships, I would also, encourage that audience, right? Because at the end of the day, it's all about considering that audience and building that relationship. So whether it's a one-on-one relationship or a one-to-many relationship, you're still going to consider the one-on-one when the one-to-many. You
Mm.
need to think about who's reading your content and the value that you're adding to them. So in, let's say, a corporate fundraising promotion, right? And
Mhm.
then, that's a word that can get kind of ugly, right? You're thinking about
Mhm.
promotion and what does that look like and what's
Right.
for us and, that kind of a thing. But in everything you're putting out there, you want to be providing value. So, the top three ways that I tend to think about that are in terms of education, inspiration, and entertainment. Um, and again, it will vary from organization to organization. But if you think about your content buckets and the things that you want to put out there, you're not just talking about the partnership to talk about the partnership, right? You're putting it out there in terms of the value that it provides to your audience. So again, like let's just use an Instagram post for an example. If you're putting it out there and you're tagging the partner, and it's just like a logo and calling it a day, that's not going to get a lot of engagement because your audience is like, so what? So
Right.
you need to really think about how that will engage your audience. Both because it will increase engagement, like just in terms of your metrics, like you will get
Mhm.
more engagement on that post. Um, but then also, you get a sense of what people want to see based on that, right? So you're going to get a sense of, if you're partnering with someone who's aligned in terms of your organizational values, which, I'm sure you can speak to
Mhm.
other in
Yeah,
terms
yeah.
of the right partners, but, you should be. Then that's something your audience is going to care about, right? If your audience cares about your values, if they're following nonprofits on social media, then they are people who care. And then they want to care about for-profits that also care about the same things. So again, it's all of that alignment, both internally in terms of the partnership and in terms of what you're putting out there in the world, that's really going to benefit everybody. And then once you have increased engagement, then that's a great way to strategically, pitch new corporate partners, where it's like, look how well this did last time, and our audience really loved it, because you're keeping all of those things in mind.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I think one of the interesting things when we're in that place of figuring out audience that I often find we get tripped up a little bit when I'm talking with clients is, on one hand, there's like the end audience of the promotion as we're
Mhm.
describing it, or this idea that the company wants to be seen by a lot of people, and that piece of the puzzle, it, kind of reflects what you just talked about. But for me, one of the steps that I spend a lot of time on is, you quickly mentioned it, is the audience of one, or the audience of a few. And this platform, LinkedIn, right? Because at this point, when I'm doing prospecting, and even a bunch of the recognition for companies, it's in this space. It's not meant for everybody, right? It's
Mhm.
not about promoting the partnership to all the people. It's about maybe employee engagement, employee retention, building partnerships that way. And so I find one of the things that you know is really important from a corporate partnership perspective, that doesn't always fit well with the other social media platforms, is LinkedIn. And I'm always sort of trying to get people to sort of think about LinkedIn as a separate channel, not necessarily the channel that you put the same thing as you would put elsewhere,
Mhm.
because we're really just we're trying to speak inside a corporate community.
Mhm.
And that for me has been one of the places where I've seen more openness between marketing teams and fundraising teams to come together, because it isn't sort of uh, blasting the message out to everybody. It is a more directed message to a more directed, clear audience. And so
Mhm.
to me, that's one of the tactics that I love to see show up, and don't see it often enough on marketing plans. And it's so valuable from a corporate fundraiser point of view, to have like a LinkedIn strategy that's really about connecting with companies and putting
Mhm.
content there that you know I think has a um, different criteria for how you measure it
Mhm.
than what you would measure in Instagram, or measure in Facebook, or even advertising more generally, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, and it definitely, each platform is different.
mhm,
And each but I will still say that you can and should repurpose the same content in different ways on different platforms,
that's it.
definitely considering the audience. Um, but again, you're thinking about the value you're providing, so you're not just, yeah, on any platform, right? So you're not
Mhm,
just putting up, here's this thing we did, but you're telling a story about the impact of that thing that you did, and thinking about telling that story from several different angles, right? And different angles may work better on different platforms, right? It could be someone who, from the corporate side, who volunteered, or someone who's a supporter of yours, who participated in whatever the partnership was, and was really impacted by that. And you can tell like the different stories from different angles and share those across the platforms in different ways. Repurposing content serves several purposes. It benefits the marketing team as the content creators because they don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time, right? It benefits the fundraising team because they can also take that content that was put out in more of a mass way, whether it's on Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn, and then direct it to one or two specific people and say, hey, I thought of you when I saw this. I hope I would love for you to read this and make it more pointed. And then again, like it's one piece of content that gets used across. So, and then again, you're thinking about that value, right? So you can mix it up in different ways, and you can mix up your calls to action as well, right? It benefits the marketing team to have content that is not always come to this program or donate, right? Because that often gets put up on social media and doesn't do super well generally. But you want to be able to have all those different content pieces, and different calls to action as well. So um, maybe it's go buy this thing through this company, which will support us. But maybe it's also just like drop an emoji, drop a heart if you like this, that kind of a thing. So you can mix it up
Yeah.
ways, and maybe one of those is better for Instagram and one of them is better for LinkedIn, but then the same thing can be shared in several different ways. So really,
Yeah.
I mean, that collaboration to me just says that like everyone's a winner when that happens because it makes everyone's life easier.
It's true. I had a follow-up question, which you started to answer, and I want to spend a little bit more time there, is like the repurposing of content internally too. Like I think there is that obvious, I think it's obvious,
Mhm,
when you create a post, how can it go multiple places? But you did mention, and I really love this, like what about the content that is like written for individuals,
mhm,
and like repurposing that? And I all the time I'm asking, have you read the DM letter? Is there something in there that we can pull out that we could use in our deck, or that you could send to a corporate partner? And I think that is like a opportunity that is missed in so many organizations, because they're thinking, oh, that we're going to produce this thing specifically for the corporate audience,
mhm,
when if you've produced a great story, it's a great story. Now let's figure out, how to get it to the right people at your corporate partners or at your corporate prospects in a format that fits for them. And so, yes, that's not going to be a big envelope, going to their house. That
mhm,
that doesn't mean the story that's inside that envelope isn't a story that you want to like pull out and put into an e-news, or pull out and just send as an attachment or
mhm,
whatever. And I think it's unfortunate that kind of um, repurposing of content
mhm,
doesn't happen as often. And I think it might be a little bit because of where you started the conversation, where if you've got a strategy and then you have an audience and then you have the tactic with the audience, then it's
mhm,
like, well, that tactic went with that audience.
mhm,
It sometimes gets missed to say, hey, there's a tactic down there that could come back up and go down the next audience's list of things, right?
yeah, yeah, definitely. And yeah, I mean, yes, I think that the tactics can be repurposed in different ways as well. But I would also like again go back to that audience piece. That yes, if you're thinking about it for a corporate audience, that sounds very sterile. It
Mhm.
sounds, it sounds almost inauthentic because it's what we're speaking to the corporation and not to
Right.
a human audience on the other platform. But
Yeah.
we're all people, right? So at the end of the day, be human and be a human speaking to another human. And then exactly that story, if again, if there's that values alignment, if there's a reason why you're looking to partner with this corporation in the first place, um, then there's going to be that, I bet you'll appreciate this and it will probably be true because, you'll have done your research, you'll have considered that audience. And at the end of the day, like that authentic voice of one human speaking to another, that's going to, I mean, that's marketing too, right?
That's right. I'm going to totally spring a question on you that I didn't ask in advance, so I hope it's okay. Um, Anybody listening knows that I'm inclined to do this. Okay, so what came up for me as you said this is one of the things that that humanizing piece. So like in LinkedIn, we often find that like the person's page, the person's profile gets more traction than like the
Mhm.
company or the charity profile. So this is one of the things I'm always trying to work with, and even in Instagram or whatever, or any of the other platforms where you start to have the organization's profile, and then you're trying to make it a human feed or a human thing. How do you navigate that in these platforms, where do you have any suggestions about how to humanize them? And obviously I'm more inclined towards LinkedIn. Like, you have that, the business page, the charity page, and it,
Mhm.
it does feel very sterile, even though of course there's a person who's
Mhm.
like writing the things.
Yeah.
uh, so any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So one of the ways that I work with organizations is we start with a messaging guide, and we really think through, what is their story, what is their big picture story that they're telling, and then, how their day-to-day stories support that. And again, like that serves as a basis for the strategy, right? Because you want to make
Mhm.
sure that you're clear on your messaging, and a big part of that is audience as well. Another part of that is voice. If your organization was a person, what would that person sound like? What is that person's
Mhm.
personality, right? That is how you show up for your people in the world. And how can you be human in those ways? So the values piece is one part of it, but then also like just using human attributes and thinking about how you are going to be a human when you show up. On LinkedIn, you have sort of an added bonus of you can put it, in a human authentic way on the page, and then have actual humans sharing it, or human pages, I should say. Everyone's a human.
Yeah.
But if you have, the ED sharing a particular post from the page with a little note on top, that is again consistent in voice, with what the organization is putting out there, but that makes it even more personal and more authentic, and also really extends the reach. Because to your point, individuals will often have a greater following, or more connections than the pages will. So,
Yeah, I
uh,
love that example. We definitely throw that out all the time to
yeah.
people, like, put it on your page and then everybody reshare it so that you add like the personal touch to the post. Such a good suggestion. So everyone listening, yes, do that. I love it. I was going to ask, so we do have a comment in from Tasha, our friend Tasha, who knows all the things LinkedIn, and she mentions that business can interact and follow along with other organizations. Oh, okay, yeah, so that's good. So
Yes.
new features all the time in LinkedIn, folks. That is an important thing to remember. All platforms, right? As soon as you get the hang of it, there'll be a new feature, and you can leverage that as well.
Yeah, I saw something great actually the other day. It wasn't on LinkedIn, it
Mhm.
was on Instagram, but same,
Yeah,
the same,
kind of.
thought about what we're talking about here. It was between the New York Public Library and the Met, and I don't remember the third organization. It was a different library. And the three of them were interacting, they were commenting on one of the posts from the New York Public Library. And it read as if they were individuals, but it was actually from their accounts.
Good.
It was such a human moment, and I love that.
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh, look at this." Like, it's
Y-
wanted as a human myself, I wanted to then engage with each of them because I saw that happening. Um, excuse me. So I think that's definitely something to keep in mind also.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Okay. So we've kind of teased out a few things, but I'm going to ask it straight up that, as the sort of corporate partnership fundraising person, I do see situations where we're asked to create content that either thanks a company or includes the company in some way or their employees into a story. And sometimes we'll get pushback from marketing. They'll be like, we don't want to do that. We don't want our feed to look like a commercial. We don't get as much engagement, some of these sorts of things. So let's brainstorm or draw on our experience for some tactics and real practical advice on if that's happening to you at your organization. What are some suggestions you have for that fundraiser, from the marketing seat, that would help smooth that pathway?
Yeah. So it's, first of all, I will say it is true that if it looks like a commercial, the engagement will be lower. So I understand where those
Mhm.
marketers are coming from. However, um, as I said, like your content strategy should be built around your content buckets, and those should be primarily providing value, if not exclusively providing value, right? So even in
Mhm.
your asks and even in your even in your more promotional posts, they should still always be providing value in different ways, as we've said, entertaining or inspirational or educational around your specific mission, but also your cause area in general. Um, so just thinking about all of those different things. So when someone from fundraising says, we have this corporate partner and we need to thank them, and how can we do that publicly? It's not like this side thing that we need to wedge in between posts. It should be built into the content strategy. So again, it's like, how can we work collaboratively internally so that that's being promoted? But then it also benefits the engagement, right? So it's, how can you tell that story that also thanks, which is not just like throwing up a logo and thank you to our partner, because they're right, that won't get any engagement. But if, again, you're telling a story around it in different ways from different perspectives, you could end up with multiple thank yous that are still consistent with your content strategy. And again, then you're eliminating a lot of that friction because you're all working toward the same goals.
Yeah, exactly. I know I often come back and say, like, is there a cool picture? That's why I love the ones that focus a bit more on the employees' participation or
Mhm,
volunteerism and some of those kinds of things. I feel like that gets at different angles.
mhm,
And then sometimes I also think, you know what? Is it terrible to have a post every now and then that is just a thank you? I equate this to this question about sometimes when we're working with partners, we want to get demographic data or information from donors so that we know more about the audience. And when we say, as one of the opening sentences, like getting this data and aggregating it is an important part of us getting more money to help the cause, then people are like, yeah, we'll answer these questions.
mhm,
And if I'm following a charity I really care about, and then every now and then there's a post that's thanking somebody else that's giving money, I may or may not like it, but it doesn't make me like flee for the hills and
mhm,
never engage again. And so I also wonder, could there be more grace around the occasional post that is like that if it doesn't cause harm? And that's where, you're talking about values alignment and some of these other factors being in place, which I do think are really important. Or if the activation, for example, is like go buy the thing or click on the thing. How can that kind of work into the communication buckets in a way that you know doesn't have the same bar of measurement as an amazing impact story, right? Like every single post is not going to be equally like
yeah.
awesome,
That's true.
right?
But again, I think that goes back to having the strategy, right? In the first
Right.
place,
Yeah.
thinking about how, I still, I do draw upon my days in-house, but I
Yeah.
do work in a fractional model with some organizations now. So I still do
Yeah.
this when I'm putting together a content calendar and actually doing the implementation myself. I track which posts are educational, which are inspirational, which are entertaining. Yes, there will be some just straight up asks in there. And, to that point, I think it's better to have some asks that are, when we talk about varied calls to action, I appreciate when the call to action is not just click the donate button, right? So if
Mhm.
it's, buy this thing or, participate in this partnership, I actually think that's a good thing. But you want to make sure that it's not too heavy on that one particular ask. And, because then it does read like a series of commercials. So I think it really is about, mixing it up and showing up consistently for your audience, again, in a way that provides value to that audience, right? And thinking
Mhm.
about that.
Yeah.
But I don't think that it does any harm per se to have that in there. Um, but again, I think it's that taking that step back internally and saying, like, okay, so we know this is coming. Also, like, people don't like surprises, right? Like, and things happen
Mhm.
and they come up, but like to the
Mhm.
extent that when you're planning out your month or your quarter or whatever it is in terms of your content, you can say, oh, I know this is coming because we've communicated internally. And so I'm going to sandwich this one maybe more promotional post with some impact stories or other things that provide value. then that one post, engagement may be a little lower, it may not be, but whatever it is, it's not going to be detrimental and it's not going to ruffle feathers in the same way because it's part of a greater strategy.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think, one of the themes that's come up throughout, that planning clearly makes a big difference. And from my point of view, that some of that planning is done together so that we can both like share, this is what I need from marketing, this is how it fits, that not springing it on anybody, like we're going to have a certain number of these posts, how can you make sure that there's like space, so as you said, they're kind of sandwiched between. I mean, frankly, it's not good for me either as a corporate partnership fundraiser to have it be like a stream of different logos. Nobody wants to see that either. I want when my companies go to the feed, I want them to see an impact story, a cool
Mhm,
thing that's going on, another group that they're involved in, and occasionally I want them to see examples of other companies that are also supporting, right? Like
mhm,
all of that, because that gives them the clear picture
mhm,
of the breadth of what this organization is doing, right? And that's awesome. Like
mhm.
that's good for everybody. So
Yeah,
I think, yeah, this sort of internal conversations need to happen, and I think the more the Venn diagram of planning overlap is like heavy overlap, and then we go do our things, but heavy overlap on the planning and deciding how we could fit into the buckets in a way that makes sense for everybody. How we
absolutely.
can co-define the audiences, like really make sure that the marketing team understands who the companies are and what they look like in
Mhm,
terms of one of the audiences, as well as the audience of the companies. So those are two different audiences that happen.
mhm. And
But
then
keeping those dialogues open, I think, is just really important.
absolutely. And when there's that internal alignment, it's not an imposition. It's actually helpful because marketers can only come up with so much content on their own, right? They need like I need to rely on other parts of every organization to have that content, right?
Right.
That corporate sponsorship piece is going to be a story that I'm telling and a thank you that I'm posting and all of those things, but without all of that I'm sort of on my own coming up with it. So again, that internal we're all on the same team really does benefit everybody.
Well, thanks for that. That's a very optimistic note as we're getting to the end of our time here. I love that. I mean, I definitely can say without hesitation that when marketing and fundraising are working together, corporate partnerships are more successful. It is more enjoyable to go to work. It just feels better. Like the genius of both teams being maximized is to me like the sweet spot of success. So thanks so much for sharing the advice on how we can do that. I know that people who are listening are going to want to find you. So where can they connect with you, Jordana?
So I'm here on LinkedIn, Jordana
Yeah.
Merkin. I'm also on Instagram at Voice for Good. On my website, also, if you want to start thinking about your own messaging guide or your own marketing plan, I have some prompts there to get you started. Those are at voiceforgoodmarketing.com/prompts. But yeah, I'm happy to connect in any or all of the ways.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks to everyone who joined. If you've left a question, we will get back to you, or don't hesitate to DM us and we will answer your questions. You can follow me. Don't hesitate to hit the bell to subscribe so you find out when our next LinkedIn live is. I do try to do one a month on the third Thursday. And you can join me also at bridgeraise.com, where I have an assessment to help you figure out how you're doing with your corporate partnerships. Thanks so much for joining, and I look forward to being in touch with you soon.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you.